Good evening. We're so glad to have you with us tonight. We're all kind of talking a little bit about how, right now, the pollen is strong, and we all sound like we are dying. I feel like I'm dying. Marsh and I very foolishly decided to get in shape. And so we started walking in our neighborhood, and the wind is howling, and we're out there, and you can see the thickness of the pollen in front of you, and neither one of us got to thinking, we're breathing this in. And now both of us can hardly breathe and coughing. I feel like my voice is 2 octaves lower.
I had some beautiful flowers in my office a couple weeks ago, and they had lilies in them, and they were gorgeous. And so I had them on my desk, and I moved them off of my desk to a bookshelf.
Right beside my office.
Well, and then I moved them out into the hall, kind of near his office, and then moved them downstairs in the mansion. And tonight I was like, I can't take them any longer. And so I bagged them up because they were way too fragrant.
That's
beautiful, too much.
It is the season right now. So I just wanted to make sure that I'd be ready for Easter, and I didn't let something start happening. So I went to go see a friend who was a doctor yesterday, and he looked at me all and goes, "You're fine, you just got allergies." So if we start coughing, sneezing, sound strange, that's what's going on. All of us together, we will all sound like we are dying. So
it's a good thing Easter's coming. So the resurrection's ahead. On Easter morning, it's funny, when we come here for the walkthrough, we get here, on Easter, we get here at 6:45. And when we first walk in, because all the lilies are here, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's so beautiful." It just starts. So we start passing Sudafed around that morning, and
we literally do. It's like, open those doors, get some air in here. We can't breathe.
Yeah,
so.
The beauty, your eyesight is faster than breathing it in, but quickly after.
We're so very, very glad that you are here, and why don't we start with a word of thanksgiving. Oh God, we are so very grateful for the gift of your love. You are the one who guides us and sustains us through the good times and through the hard times. We know that there is nothing in life or death, neither angels nor principalities, nor things present nor things to come, that can ever separate us from your love. Pour out your Holy Spirit upon us now as we gather, that we might be drawn ever closer to you and to each other, so that our faith might be strengthened and enable us to share your love and bring hope in this world. Amen. Well, tonight is our last official class here, but it's not the last class of Wednesday Night Alive. And to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be getting to experience next Wednesday night, we have a video.
Hey, my name is R.J. Cooper. I am from Chicago, but live in Texas now. And I wrote a book called A Most Beautiful Thing. That's not a film on Peacock NBC, the story of the first all-black high school rowing team in the country. We all did interviews about how it was growing up in Chicago, through the violence, through the lack of educational opportunities, and how we found this sport and built this relationship with the water. And individually, we all said in different interviews, it's the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced, being able to be in a place where we can meditate and download that serenity of just water and grass, and how it was just this rhythmic sport that calmed the storms in our life. I've never said the word dad a day in my life. My mother was a drug addict, and losing friends to violence, and hearing gunshots when you sleep, and that was like every day for me on the west side of Chicago. And so for me, I was always in search for hope. And to be honest, as a kid, because of what I saw, I believe that God exists everywhere but the west side of Chicago. But I walked in the lunchroom, I saw a boat, and I was like, "What is this?" And this lady said, "Hey, we joined the crew team." And I'm like, "Crew? I don't even know what that means. You're taught in Chicago. If someone asks you to join a crew, run the other way as fast as you can." And so I was confused, but it was an opportunity to make history. All my high school classmates, they were from different gangs, different neighborhoods. I mean, honestly, we hated each other at first. I found a brotherhood that was willing to go the distance with me. Yeah, that's the message that I hope that people take away, like how to leave this place better than we found it.
I think you're going to be incredibly inspired next week. He will be here in person, be speaking here at the downtown campus. We will have dinner next week, just like we always do. But all the classes will be coming together in here to hearing Ashray speak. And I think it will be a very inspirational night. It's a night of, he is a person of strong faith, so I think it'll be encouraging us in our faith, and I certainly encourage you to invite some friends to come. It'll be something kind of new. And we're always looking for those ways where you can invite somebody to something special. And this is one of those kind of things. It's easy to invite someone to come in here, someone as unique as Ashray who's doing this, and as I said, to be growing up in Chicago, I've never even heard the word crew. What are you supposed to do? Is that another type of gang, and then to find people from all those backgrounds coming together, and they did a beautiful thing. So it's going to be special. If you're watching online, I certainly hope you can come next week if you'd like to in person, enjoy dinner. It'll be our last night of Wednesday Night Alive, and we're going to have a great time. Anything you want to add to that?
Please be here.
All right, it's going to be great. Tonight we wanted to kind of bring a recap and give you time for questions so that we can kind of visit and wrap up where we have been, not just through this semester, but through the last several years. Actually, we're going to go back to 2016 and just kind of walk down memory lane, remember where we were and where we are at this moment.
Because obviously God is doing a brand new thing in St. Luke's. And so it's a great time, and we are excited about what God has been doing and bringing us to this point.
Sunday we came together and we had our vote, and the really nice thing is it was a confidential vote, and I have no idea how you voted. I think you probably know how I voted, but I don't know how you voted. And the good news is, I don't care. I said that last week. I wanted to say it now. A family can come together and disagree. That's what it means to be a family. We don't always agree on all things. And so I feel like it was a wonderful thing. And I can't say that I don't know how everybody voted. Marsh was sitting next to me. I know how she voted. My daughter was next to her. I know how she voted. And then my son-in-law was next to my daughter, and so I knew how he voted. So I did know 4 votes, but that's the wrap of how much I knew what anybody voted. You had an interesting experience, though.
So we were sitting over there, and I was sitting beside my daughter, Hannah. I see people from my row here tonight, or I was part of their row, but we were in one row, and so there were Hannah and myself were in one row. Chris was behind me, and it was nice. Linda and Amy Alden were behind Hannah and myself. Brooks was combing the rows as an usher. And when it came time to vote, we voted. Hannah and I took pictures, mother-daughter vote pictures together. But then you remember there was a moment where the DS asked for all the votes to be passed down to the end of the row. So that was a change in what I had heard was going to happen. And so, but I'm very dutiful. I passed it down the row. Hannah passed it. We all passed it down to the person on the end. And just a short while later, we learned that was one way of voting, but that was not the way we were going to vote. And so please pass them back out. And so the dilemma is when you pass them all face down to the end of the row and you pass them back out, if it's a check mark or X and you don't put your name on it, how do you know whose vote you get? But we passed them back out. And so I had a vote. I never flipped it over. And there was something actually really, really meaningful to me in that moment, because For me, it didn't matter if I was holding a yes or a no vote. It didn't matter at all if it was my vote or someone in my row. For me, it was, I'm getting to cast a vote for my family of faith. And it truly was the meaning of we're a family of faith. I don't care whose vote I have. I will represent myself or them in casting this ballot. And it still gives me kind of goosebumps because I'm like, this is what it's about. I'm committed to this family of faith. The whole family of faith was committed to that moment, and it was deeply meaningful to me. And I was very excited. We told you beforehand, no matter how the vote goes, we're committed to St. Luke's, whatever path of action. And so in that moment, it was kind of the highlight. Just we're voting for each other, and that was very, very, it was very moving for me.
We hope this is the last week we talk about it. It will depend upon what's going to happen on April 22nd. And we're going to kind of walk through that process tonight. But God willing, and if everything goes the way it's supposed to be, we're able to be focusing on all kinds of other exciting things we're going to tell you about tonight.
I just will say, I think we've taken in 4 people since Sunday.
Actually, it was 5, and there's a couple more lined up.
We've taken in 5 people since Sunday, and there's a couple more lined up.
I mean, people literally have been just showing up and beating our door down, saying, I want to join the church. Again, one of those kind of things we just did not anticipate, never had thought about, and that's very, very exciting to see that people were wanting to do that. I can't help but say, I also found myself incredibly nostalgic over this weekend. Having been blessed to have come here 32 years ago, and I'm coming up on my 50th year as a Methodist minister in June. I did have a birthday 2 days ago, turned 69, no secret. And when you walk down the hall, there is a stranger down there on the hall. I walk by and look at that and think, who was that guy? And Marsha's hair still looks the same, but she's cheating. So
I think Marcia just lives a calmer, kind of Zen life, and Bob is more stressed.
So, but one of the things that I was thinking about this weekend, and you'll know why in a second when I tell you, is as you were going into Wednesday Night Alive, that was one of the programs we created right off the bat. I told you a week or two ago that when I came, we started saying, what do you think we need to do for reviving a downtown church? And one group was saying, we need to go on TV. Another said, you got to have a midweek program. And I said, we can't afford to be wrong. We're going to do both. And so we created Wednesday Night Alive, and we went on television.
And both of those are still incredibly formative in the lives of so many in this church. They are still integral to the success of St. Luke's.
They truly, truly are. So the congregation knew the things that we really did need to do, and so we did it and put it in place. Wednesday Night Alive started in the fellowship hall where we had dinner. You might remember that, Cleo and I. We would meet in the fellowship hall. There would be at least 20 of us having dinner. I mean, seriously, it was just a small group. We had some classes at different times, and it continued to grow and grow to what it is today with what we have with dinner. But we had music being played, and and so there's a wonderful gentleman who was playing this music for us, and he was so good he had learned how to play by ear as a child, and so he would just kind of be playing and having a good time. And then whenever I walked into the room, most people didn't realize underneath he would break into The Eyes of Texas. And so I always came to Wednesday Night Alive with The Eyes of Texas. And that's John Michael Williams' dad who actually did that. And John was speaking Sunday at our meeting, and I thought gave such a great statement of family of faith and the history of his family, and loved his mom and dad who were members of this Wedding Ring Sunday School class, and for John to be speaking and talking, and you did such a great job in what you had to say to us, John.
Absolutely.
We're all very, very grateful. So, lots of history, lots of fun, lots of very meaningful times, and we will continue on with that. And so whether you're watching online, you're here, regardless of how you voted, we voted as a family of faith, and now we go forward with a commitment to share God's love and bring hope in this world. That's what we're about. So how did we get to where we were last Sunday? You can go back, well, we can go back to 1972, because that was the first meeting of General Conference after we became the United Methodist Church. And that was the first General Conference we began arguing about human sexuality.
So our merging conference that we merged with the Evangelical United Brethren was in 68. So that was the merging conference. That's been the only conference, General Conference, in the history of United Methodism that we haven't argued about it. And the argument's only ramped up.
I mean, it really is fascinating when you say it that way.
There's only one.
That is literally true. That is the truth.
I only say literally
only the truth. I got it. So that was the problem that we had happen. Didn't argue about it in 68 when we came together. We were arguing about it in 1972. We have every year since. And so it really started coming more to a crescendo. And in 2016, that's when we went to Portland for General Conference. Portland General Conference. You can see, I think you see people lying down on the floor.
They hogtied themselves as a representation, but they did this in the middle of proceedings.
In the middle of proceedings, other people ringed around and they were chanting as well. The conference was just so dysfunctional, so angry. The sides had become so much more polarized than ever before. And we had a lot of things to deal with. The one thing, again, I always kept saying was, the one thing we didn't deal with was declining membership and worship attendance. We dealt with a whole lot of other things, but we didn't deal with the thing. What are we supposed to be about? The business of truly winning new people to Christ? No, we didn't deal with that, but we dealt with a lot of other things, and in such an unhealthy way. And so there was this tension, there was this anger. And so we had our one meeting in which we were finally dealing with this issue of homosexuality. And as we were, there was a person from the far left. And I say it because there really is far left, far right, and then all the middle and the variations in the middle. Well, this is far left.
And when we talk about the far left, far right, we're talking about the people who are incompatible with any other belief. So a far left person will not tolerate anybody who has a more conservative view. They will not be allowed to participate in their group. They want to deny that. The same thing on the right. A far right person doesn't want to allow the thought process or the theology of a person on the far left. They are adamant that it can only be their view. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the far extremes.
And that word is the word we learned to use at all of our meetings, was incompatible. They'd say, I am incompatible with someone who thinks differently from me. And I think what we showed Sunday was we are, as a church, compatible. We don't all have to think alike, and yet we still can love alike. Well, the far left and the far right don't feel that way. And the lady who was speaking was attacking the bishop, who a different bishop will chair each session. And she started accusing him, you're trying to communicate signals to other people out here how to vote. We could tell by your fingers. Did you have one finger out? Did you have 5 fingers out? How are you moving? And it's like,
he had some kind of medical condition, and I can't remember, but he would have tremors in his hand. And they accused him, those hand tremors, of signaling a vote. No, it got ugly.
I mean, that's how much we were talking about we've lost it.
He thought that they were teasing at first.
Yeah.
And
they weren't teasing. And so she started trying to make different motions, and the bottom line in the end, she said, I'd like to move that you were removed from the chair. And she had said so many hurtful things and handled it in such a way. I mean, he literally finally turned the chair around and he was crying. Trying to govern this almost 1,000 people, 865, people from around the world, and you were getting so twisted and turned up, and it was not a spirit of we're all on the same team, we're caring about one another. So while she's acting so badly, then the members of the Central Conference got up, which is mainly the Philippines, Africa, Eurasia. They jumped to their feet, and in defense, they began chanting and singing and marching through the conference. And I will always remember, I was sitting right there as a delegate, and I thought, we just crossed a line. This is anarchy. It'll never be the same. This is anarchy. And it truly was. I mean, I don't know how long it went on before they were able to regain control to say, we're going to continue to go on with our business. So seeing this spirit of what you're looking at and going, how can we be acting like this? We are all the church. And we're the elected representatives from around the world for the church. And this is how we're acting towards one another? I mean, it was appalling. Not our finest moment. So they finally got through that, and so we then went on to discuss and debate the issue of where's the Methodist Church going to stand. And those, again, of far right began proposing legislation that was of such mean spirit. Mandatory punishment for doing a same-sex wedding. And just going on, and as they started to propose this, again, I'm sitting there thinking, we're about to go over the cliff. This, again, is going to be the divide in the Methodist Church. If you remember, through our sharing of things I have said, I think our problem has been General Conference. You have 865 people show up from around the world, and we all think we're in charge. We don't have a president. We don't have a pope. We don't have one single bishop who's able to kind of lead and give us vision and call us to order. We have all of us here, and it's not a way to figure out a problem.
Think about Sunday afternoon, you're heading home from church, and somebody says, well, where do you want to eat? And the other person, I don't know, where do you want to eat? I don't know, where do you... I mean, it can go back and forth with two people. Imagine 865 to 900 people trying to decide anything, let alone something very, very serious.
It's impossible, and you're not coming up with creative solutions. You're not bringing something forward that says, how should we handle this as a church? And so it's so out of control when that's what's happening in that kind of a moment. It was Adam Hamilton of Church of the Resurrection who got to a microphone and said, bishops, we've elected you to lead us. Lead. Help us find a way forward so that we do not go down this path. I'd like to propose that we table all this discussion and give you a chance to lead us. Help us find a way forward. It barely, I don't remember the exact vote, it barely passed, but it did pass. And so all discussion was tabled. Nothing happened in 2016. And we then asked the bishop to create this commission called A Way Forward. They would go away, they would start inviting people to come that they knew were of a very conservative approach, a very liberal approach, all kinds of diversity. How do we bring this committee together? And we thought they would bring back a report in 2018. And so Portland at 2016, it basically erupted, and we got right to that point, and we pushed it back down and said, help us figure out a better way to do this. They did not get it done by 2018, so it went to 2019. We talked about that, and we had General Conference now in St. Louis.
So in St. Louis, while the Bishop's Commission on the Way Forward was developing the Way Forward plan, the far right, the far conservative group they knew that the bishop's plan wasn't going to be agreeable to their beliefs. And so they started working on what was called the traditional plan. And so when we came to General Conference, the specially called General Conference of 2019, they decided, since the bishops had the Way Forward plan, and the far right had a traditional plan, and there were other plans along the way. The best thing to do in how to deal with this legislation, because it was a very small time window to work on this, I think it was 3 days, and so they decided to put the priorities to the delegates. So they gave all the legislation that was going to come before the delegates. There was a piece of legislation from Westpath, which is pension and benefits for clergy and church staff, and then all the different plans. And the delegates were to rank them how they wanted to deal with them. And so I have a picture of, okay, so if you can see this, the Westpath recommendations came first. It's a little unsettling for me to think that out of everything we wanted to deal with, we wanted to make sure our pension ideas were dealt with first. But the next thing was the traditional plan. Then you had a couple more disaffiliation types, and then at the very bottom, you see the one church plan. So in a vote of less than 30 minutes, it was clear to everyone that the work of the bishops the preceding 3 years was off the table. The traditional plan would rule the day after we settled the pension legislation. It was that quick. And I was sitting there, and I remember it was almost like somebody sucked all the air out of the room at once. Just because, it was a shocking conclusion to be that definitive.
30 minutes, 3 years worth of work, out the window. We're not even going to discuss it. Let's get back to where we were in 2016.
And so the traditional plan was the introduction of mandatory punishment. And you remember we talked about how we got to that point, that once those who were more progressive saw that they were never going to be able to change the language in the Book of Discipline, they started disobeying the Book of Discipline in far more public ways. And so the ones who were more traditional, conservative, got tired of that being kind of in their face. We talked about the bishop who did a same-sex wedding down in Alabama, not the most progressive state. And it was done, again, to just bring attention to the subject. The traditionalists got fed up with it, and so they created the traditional plan to force bishops to punish those who were disobeying the Book of Discipline. So that's how we got mandatory punishment.
And you really think about that. It really was so inappropriate for this bishop to come down to the South where he knew everybody felt a different way and to do that. And I don't blame the traditionalists there for going, well, good grief, we didn't invite you down here and you know how we feel about this. And so you really had both sides ramping up in your face, which is exactly opposite of what we've been trying to do, of saying, how do you ramp it up in your face versus we can have differences of opinion.
If you're going to throw it down and each side keeps throwing it down, you can see why that escalates and gets uglier and uglier. The fact is, I think that we got the mandatory punishment language in the Book of Discipline not because of what happened in 2019, but that years and years before, we stopped taking our eyes off of growing the church. When you take your eyes off of the most important elements, you end up with declining church, problems with finances, and problems in the language of the Book of Discipline that go completely against the theology of the Methodist Church. It's because you're not focusing on what you need to. And that's where we ended up. And so we had mandatory punishment in our Book of Discipline. It's not biblical. It's not of Christ. It's not Wesleyan. And as we said, it doesn't represent St. Luke's.
So we knew when we got through with 2019, which was a debacle. And
we thought 2016 was ugly.
2019 proved we didn't know ugly.
I remember one person being at the microphone saying, because at that time, we've told you how, especially in the central conferences in Philippines and Africa, their number of delegates keeps going up. And so there is a frustration when you have worked all these years to try to change language, and it's very clear you're not going to be able to do that. And so I remember one person going to the microphone and seeing that all of this is being put into place. He said, I'm just going to keep talking here, and I'm going to hold the microphone till the monster trucks come. Because after General Conference, they were having a monster truck rally, which seemed kind of fitting to where we were. But what does that tell you? Somebody who's, I'm not going to let go. I mean, and had no problem saying it in front of everybody. It was so ugly and painful.
When we left on the last night, because of what was going on right outside the convention center and what was going on in the convention center, Keith, Marcia was here, Keith was sitting with Marcia and said, I'm not letting you go until Bob is here. I will walk with you wherever you're going to wind up going, just to make sure you're okay. This is at a church meeting. So that's where we had descended to. I'm telling you, so when we start thinking General Conference is going to lead us out into the future, some bright new day.
And let's just wait and see.
I'm sorry, I've lost my belief that General Conference can lead us into a bright new day.
We would love if it happens. Please know that if next year God comes down and takes care of everything, we will be at the front of the line rejoicing. If we seem a little cynical, you know why. We haven't seen it leading that direction.
So after it was all done, some people got together and started working on a thing called the protocol. And we actually brought in a professional mediator. And
Kenneth Feinberg,
who had, and I don't remember all the amazing places he had gone and helped to negotiate.
One was the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a movie made of that called Worth, starring Michael Keaton, I believe. But incredible person, I mean, just beyond belief, and he did it pro bono.
That's good. The fascinating thing is, so this guy who has had this great success agrees to come in and do it for free. He is Jewish.
Which is...
Let me help you
it.
Two Christian groups who are fighting with each other figure out how to get along and come up with some idea. I mean, the irony of it all, I just kept sitting there and going, huh?
So in groups before, they didn't quite get the extreme elements because you can imagine why you don't invite that. He invited from one extreme to the other. I mean, the farthest extremes and everybody in between. And I mean, it's a miracle. They came to consensus.
They really did come to a consensus to where it was going to be suggested in terms of, if you want to leave, you can leave. Here's what you need to do. If you're going to stay, you can stay. We're going to set aside $25 million to help a different organization get started. They did amazing stuff. But you had to still vote on it at General Conference.
For 2020.
And we thought General Conference would happen in 2020. Did not happen in 2020 because of COVID, obviously. And then it didn't happen in 21, and then it didn't happen in 22. And by this point, it's hard to hold the momentum of such opposing forces together. And so by 2022, the protocol had fallen apart. People backed away from it.
It was designed, even though the traditionalists, the conservatives, obviously had ruled the day in all the preceding general conferences. They got the vote. They won every single time. They agreed to leave. And so a financial settlement, $25 million, was going to go to them to help start the Global Methodist Church. And so this is key to why everybody asks, well, why would the traditionalists or conservative people leave the United Methodist denomination now? Well, after the protocol, that's what made sense. So the Global Methodist Church was constructed, all the preliminary work, and the protocol was going to do the best case divorce possible. And then when the pandemic hit, that got kicked down the road, and they started looking at the financial settlement. They started looking at all the churches leaving, and I think the leadership the high up leadership decided, we're going to try to keep everybody together again. We're going to go back to the way we've done it all the preceding years.
So when you did that, you're left with paragraph 2553 that was passed in 2019. And that's why we've watched this play out across the United States in Methodist churches in the most ineffective way to go through a separation in which you put churches through. And again, I bring it back to General Conference. You can't take 865 people, all sit down and say, okay, what's the best way to deal with an issue like this, and how do we go forward? So we were left with a mess. And every annual conference gets to decide a whole lot of issues. Every church gets to decide issues. And it's what led us to this point. One of the interesting things, our meetings, we fully had expected in the early days when there was the protocol that we might still be United Methodist.
So I went to a meeting in Kansas City in the summer of 2019 after the specially called General Conference. And basically everybody there was everybody who didn't agree with the language in the Book of Discipline. So the far more conservative people were not at this meeting, basically centrists to the far left. And I remember being there, and I think I've shared with you, God has worked with me in my own spiritual journey, and I remember being at a table of people, Methodists from all over the country, and we talked about the problems, and it quickly became evident that I wasn't allowed to talk on any kind of issues of the LGBTQ community because I hadn't been as far left or as left as anybody at my table. And so I remember thinking at that time, I'm not conservative enough for my conservative friends. I'm not progressive enough for my progressive friends. And if you remember, we had a sermon series called You Are Enough it actually came out of that, because how many times do we always think that, I'm not old enough to do this, I'm not young enough to do this, I'm not tall enough, short enough, pretty enough, thin enough, conservative enough, progressive enough. It came out of that meeting because even in that meeting that was supposed to be all about, okay, now the conservatives aren't with us, now we can talk, I couldn't talk. And one of their things that they decided that they might do is to get back at the conservatives. They started talking about disrupting church services. And so I'm at this table, I'm a St. Luke's person, and they started talking about, what we need to do is march into their worship services and march up and down the aisles. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's so mean-spirited. And they looked at me like I was from a different planet. And it was very shocking. And I'm like, I don't belong here. These are not my people. And I knew that others weren't my people because the language of the Book of Discipline. And so we really had some, what is going on? We can disagree vehemently with people. We're not going to disrupt worship. As a Christian pastor, worship's kind of a big deal for us. And so they were seriously discussing that.
So we went back next year. I was there at the same Kansas City meeting. And again, that's when they started backing away from the protocol and saying, we're not going to do the protocol.
And gracious exit.
And a gracious exit. So that now it's like we're going to hold on to everybody. And we're not going to have a gracious exit. And what we found was the centrist had become the new right to be attacked by the far left. If you don't have the right, then who's the far right? Well, it's the people who are left who are centrist. And it started easy, started getting to see, this is not going in directions that we want to go. This would not be who we are as a church. For 134 years, we've been a church that really can embrace more than one point of view. We have Republicans and Democrats, and we're going to have all the differences that we can come up with and still love one another and have a focus on mission. And so as we began seeing that, it was like we're never going to go GMC with punitive language. Not going to go that kind of far progressive. The speech that was given, don't let the wokes take over, with the liberal kind of, well, there are those out there that I would have said, you're right, you go give that speech. It wasn't here. I've had so many of you laugh and say, I've never been called woke before. The speech actually has a place to be given. I've been living in some of those places, but it wasn't here. That's not who we are and never have been and will not be. So when all that began to go down, it became very clear that we're going to have to do something different. And so that's why we came to where we were. And we started talking about all that in 2019, 2020, 21, 22. So where are we now and where are we going to go? I want to make sure I get through so you can ask questions. So we had our vote, 92%. Today we turned in our paperwork at the annual conference. And so that was a significant day. There's a disaffiliation agreement. There's an escrow account. There's all kinds of documentation that they asked for. The administrative board minutes for the last 5 years. Staff parish relations minutes for the last 5 years. All your memorials and gifts. We turned it all in today. Today was the deadline. So tomorrow is supposed to be a Board of Trustees meeting in which they will look at there's 48 churches that have all voted to disaffiliate. 48 churches across the state of Oklahoma. Another large church is New Covenant in Edmond. There's one in Claremore. And so we have all these churches, and so they're going to deal with each one of them and say to each one, yes, they fulfilled their responsibilities, they did the things they should, and we should approve recommending them to the annual conference for disaffiliation. Or say, no, we don't approve them for disaffiliation. So that should happen tomorrow. Because we did vote at 92%, we believe that there will be a strong chance that we will receive approval because we did everything by the book, we've turned everything in, and so we believe that we should get a recommendation to go to annual conference. But we have to wait to see. And I don't know when we'll hear. They hadn't told us that. There's a booklet that comes out April the 1st that deals with pre-conference information. It has to be printed in that, so we have to know by April the 1st. But will we know before that? I don't know, but it should happen tomorrow.
In the fall, last fall, the same Board of Trustees, there were 29 churches they examined and they fulfilled all the requirements, and so the Board of Trustees recommend all 29 to be voted on.
And so we came together at OCCC, and we were there, and all 29 were put forward, and we took a vote, and it overwhelmingly carried, and it was in no time at all, and that was done. There's every reason to believe that that's not going to be how they approach it this time.
We told you it was going to be a Zoom meeting, and now they've switched it to an in-person.
It's going to be at Church of the Servant from 10 to 4 on April the 22nd, a Saturday. You don't need to set aside 6 hours to take one vote on 48 churches.
This is the only business that can happen.
So it should be that we're all coming together, 48 churches, they've passed the trustees, we all vote and say yes, done. The rumor is that they're going to pull a lot of them apart and make us debate and vote on them one by one. And
one of the things that was the bishop had said in calling for this to be in person, he talked about there will be a lunch break, and then we'll come back from lunch and resume voting. So that says you're voting before lunch, you're voting after lunch. There's at least 2 times of voting, when in the fall, it was one vote done in 30 minutes, basically. So
it has made us concerned, and if anybody's going to get pulled out and voted on by themselves, it certainly would be us, I would think. So, we again do not know how this is going to play out. Don't know what the annual conference is going to do, don't know what the trustees will do, don't know what the bishop will do. So, we still are living with a little bit of apprehension about April the 22nd. And if you know any delegates to annual conference, and you know any pastors of other churches, you might want to encourage them. Be sure and vote yes for churches that are where a congregation has come together and said, we've been praying and discerning, and 90, 92, 95, 98 have all said this is what we want to do. Why would we even think of not approving that? And so we do have that hurdle yet to go on April the 22nd. You then have 2 weeks following that in order to get all your final payments made, all the final paperwork done, and the final date is May the 6th when the disaffiliation would be done. So, this gives us 15 minutes. Why don't we stop there and just field questions and see if I can't answer more what's on your mind versus us telling you more what we have. Oh, you had a great...
So I wanted to read one section to tell you who we are at St. Luke's. You know who we are. But when we're going forward, what we're doing, what St. Luke's is accomplishing really is so unique. You know this because you know the political climate in our country, where the extreme voices seem to be the loudest, and you can't be friends with the other side, which is ridiculous. And it's not St. Luke. So I want to read to you a little passage from the book, Love Your Enemies by Arthur C. Brooks. And I can't recommend it highly enough. He is kind of a sociologist and a speaker, and he was invited to this political rally where there were several politicians speaking before him, and politicians of one party. And he has no political party, but he identifies in his ideology as center-right. And so he had heard one after another these politicians get up and say, you know, why their party was right and the other party was wrong and bad. And his part was not to be a political speech, but to talk to the group about how each party was viewed and what they could do about kind of improving their own perception out in the world. And so he said, by the time I went on stage, the crowd was pretty fired up. My speech was about how people naturally perceive conservatives and liberals in America today. I made the point that liberals are widely considered to be compassionate and empathetic, and that conservatives should work to earn this reputation as well. After the speech, a woman in the audience came up to me, and she was clearly none too happy with my comments. I thought she was going to criticize my assertion that conservatives are not thought to be as compassionate as liberals. Instead, she told me that I was being too nice to liberals. They are not compassionate and empathetic, she said. They are stupid and evil. She argued that as a public figure, I was obliged to say so plainly because it's the truth. At that moment, my thoughts went to Seattle. That's where I grew up. While my own politics tend more center-right, Seattle is arguably the most politically liberal place in the United States. My father was a college professor. My mother was an artist. Professors and artists in Seattle, what do you think their politics were? So when that woman in New Hampshire said that liberals are stupid and evil, she wasn't talking about me, but she was talking about my family. Without meaning to, she was effectively presenting me with a choice, my loved ones or my ideology. Either I admit that those with whom I disagree politically, including people I love, are stupid and evil, or I renounce my ideas and my credibility as a public figure. Love or ideology. So as a family of faith, we don't all agree. And it's why over and over again, we're going to consistently choose love. We're going to love the people in our family of faith who are more right of us and those who are more left. We're going to love the ones who have different skin color, different backgrounds, They love different teams than us. We're going to consistently choose love over ideology.
Absolutely. So that's what we've been trying to get to the whole time. Why don't we throw it open to you? You know what we're about. So what questions do you have? Yes.
I have a question about disaffiliation in the UMC. What is the advantage of the UMC to vote no on disaffiliation when membership has said somewhere in the neighborhood of 92% has said yes?
The question is, what is the advantage or what's the benefit to the UMC to vote no on a church wanting to disaffiliate like St. Luke's? As we have told you, as we kind of walked through this issue of apportionments, we showed you how we right now are being asked about $550,000 a year, closing in on $600,000 a year. I'm sure we'll soon be there. And we're not paying that full amount. We're paying the 5-starred items for all the reasons we explained in the past and walked through why we were doing what we were doing. So we're paying $150,000, $200,000. So when all the dust is settled, St. Luke's had said, once we have general conference again and we know where the church stands and we know where everything is, then we'll go back to paying full apportionments. So if we leave, even though the dust settles, that'll be a loss probably of about $600,000 to the budget. I think that there's a lot of nostalgia. I don't think everybody's going to be voting just because of money. Though don't miss that. A lot of people are also going to be voting for the fact that this church has so much history with the annual conference. When I came 32 years ago, we would have ordination service, and this place was packed, and we couldn't fit everybody in. And there's a lot of great memories around that. Wendy was ordained right up here. Mm-hmm. So was Josh. Dave was not. Keith, I'm not positive about. I was ordained back in Texas. But there's so many emotions tied with the annual conference. You know, the last few annual conferences, this place isn't half full when we have ordination services. It's why we try to keep saying things have changed and we're remembering the good old days. And so nostalgia, the good old days, that always is appealing to someone's heart. We used to have this place packed for 4 days. We didn't meet at OCU, we met here. And so many meetings throughout the year are held here. And so there's a lot of great feelings, especially for older pastors, about all the days that were spent here at St. Luke's. And so for them, the vote is purely on, you can't leave. This is where all of our history is.
It was a hard vote for, maybe not by the time of the vote, but this has been a hard process for us too. And I think of this passage by Arthur C. Brooks. It really came down to, I would say the same thing for you, but certainly for me, it was love or ideology, love or my connection to the denominational structure. And believe me, that was a hard process. I was fully United Methodist, and it grieved my heart throughout these past several years. But in the end, I feel convinced that it was a choice over love or ideology. Love to be the church that God is calling us to be open and loving and to be St. Luke's. And that had to take precedence over the structure.
But it was hard. Even
very much so.
For us, I found it is not lost on me that June, I will have been a Methodist minister for 50 years. And it is the year we will have left the United Methodist Church. So a whole lot of pastors are going to come and they're going to vote their heart and not their head. There are others who are voting $600,000. We need to keep everything going. And so I understand that one too. That's very real. So it is truly going to be driven by money and by heart. And so how do you say to a congregation who voted 92%, no, you can't go, you don't know what God wanted you to do? I don't see how you can say that.
I think the reason we bring, there's among some United Methodist ministers, we're not feeling the love right now. There is a lot of angst and animosity, and so I hope that their hearts would be changed. But
there are others who are saying, if St. Luke's pulls out, we have no anchor church. And so desire to preserve the institution, again, trumps 92% who've been praying and working and going, we want to have a future. I don't want to be trapped in a dying denomination that will be controlled by central conferences and does not change the language and the discipline and is still being led by general conference. I can go in a 10-second statement, I can tell you why I wouldn't want to be here anymore. But that's not how they're thinking. And so that's where we are. Yeah. What recourse do we have if they vote against? I think number one would obviously be to start with the bishop to go, we really need to try to negotiate this. I think we're very clear as a church where we're trying to go, what we want to do. I've said clearly to the leadership of this conference, we're not trying to burn the house down. They've had a lot of churches left who don't want anything to do with the United Methodist Church anymore. I've said, I want to walk hand in hand. I want to be cousins. We're going to support Methodist missions. If there's an issue that you want us to work on together, let me know. I'm happy to work on it with you. So we have an approach of we can be cousins. We can walk hand in hand. We can be with many things together. Other churches have not been there. So hopefully we could talk. Maybe we can negotiate something. The last recourse that I never want, but could come to it, is we would have to sue. And so, yes, churches have had to do that across the country. What I've said repeatedly from the beginning to the hierarchy of the church is we don't want to give that witness to the community. It's the last thing we want to do is to have us squaring off against the bishop or the conference against us. And I've always said, what kind of a witness does that give from the church to the community? We don't want to do that. The option is about to be left in their hands because we've done everything we're supposed to do, and we were at 92%. And so the only, I believe, gracious, loving thing is to say, I'm letting you go. The choice is with them. If they choose not to, then we'll find out what happens. Okay. Yes. It is the great question is, are all the other churches leaving exactly like us for the same reason? The answer is no. The majority are leaving because they would actually embrace the language and the discipline. But as Wendy said earlier, the bishops are not always enforcing that. And that's not here true in Oklahoma, but it is in other California, Oregon, the Northeast. They're not enforcing it. And so they're saying, wait a minute, this language is in the discipline. You're not enforcing it. We don't agree with it, so we want out. Paragraph 2553 was actually written for a St. Luke's, a church that says, we don't agree with the wording in the discipline, and we want out. That's what it was written for. It wasn't written for the conservative churches who agreed with it, but judicial council finally came back, because that's who was trying to get out, and agreed and said, whatever people have for a matter of conscience, let them do it. So it was changed by our Supreme Court, but it was actually written for a church like St. Luke's. And we are by far and away the minority who are leaving under that type of perspective. It's a great question. Yeah. I'm sorry. When you're...
No, I would never.
Back over here. Yes. Great question. What's the percent? Because our last one here was 66.7. For this one, it's 51%. Simple majority.
50.1 even.
It's 50.1 would actually be more accurate. That's right. A simple majority is what's needed on this one. So actually, it's in some ways an easier bar to chin than what was being required of other churches. Of these other 48 churches who are leaving, I was shocked when we started looking. Most have middle 80s to middle 90s. Some of the small churches where you had 15 people somewhere achieved 100%. That wasn't too hard to achieve when it was the 15, but the larger churches typically were at least in the 80s.
One thing that to help kind of bring a little bit of peace is that, so there are 48 churches right now in this season to come before April 22nd. There are still 30 to 40 more for the fall in the disaffiliation process. And so that's a lot of church delegates. Out of 400 churches, 80 to 100 are at least tender-hearted toward disaffiliation. Of those present.
Of those present. So the question is, who can go? Those who are a pastor, whether you're retired or appointed at the present time, as well as your lay delegates, the people that your church elected to go to annual conference.
It's an open meeting. Anybody can witness it, but the voting members.
For each minister that we have, we get one lay delegate. So if we have 6 ministers, we have 6 lay delegates. So there will be 12 voices from St. Luke's. So every church, if you have 1 pastor, you get 1 lay delegate. If you have 2 pastors, you get 2 lay delegates. And so those are the ones who are voting. And it is of those who are present. Of whatever number is there that day. If you have 200 people who are there that day, you'd have to get 101 votes. Yes? I understand. He said he agrees with the love all, and whether it's Republicans or Democrats or where we said, but on the agreeing that we love all regardless of the team, no, he does not agree with that now.
There you go. There's a reason Bedlam exists. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was probably one of the more challenging things when I came. I'll never forget. I used to be rather immature. When it came to sports, I was so avid. And, when we first came up here and got settled in, I can't remember who was saying, you want to go down to go see OU? I said, no. I really don't. I'd been here 4 or 5 years before finally one day I'd gotten to know different people. I was having lunch with Becky Switzer today. And she's a lovely lady, has become a good friend, gotten to know Barry. And so I said, I need to go down and go see OU. And Marcia said, great, I'll go with you. And I said, no. I need to do this by myself. So I went down to OU and walked on the campus and came home. And she said, well, what was it like? And I said, it was very nice. So it was pretty. People were nice. We had a good time. So you start learning as you get older.
Just love all.
We can love all. We got it.
And we had another.
All right. One last question. Yeah.
See if this is a possibility for the church that are getting out. I heard about 3 hours ago St. Andrews was given back $200,000 of their money they paid.
Okay. Great question. He had heard that St. Andrews, who disaffiliated in the fall, received back about $200,000 recently. And the answer is that's correct. because our annual conference truly has chosen integrity with a high road of knowing that there's several things where things could change, like pension liability. It has changed dramatically in the last 6 months, and so even though they paid it, the liability is less now, and so they received money back. So it is said that for about another 10 years,
Up till 2034.
2034, that if there's a good chance in General Conference in 2024, they're going to pass legislation where there will be no pension liability. And I can't remember our number, what we have right now is.
It dropped down to about 2.1. It
Yeah,
had
but
been,
how much pension liability? Is it 600,000 or 700,000?
it's around 600.
So if they cancel pension liability at General Conference in 24, we'll get $600,000 back. So that's why they did get it back. And I felt like that really was the high road to take, a road of integrity. And so I applaud our conference trustees for being willing to do that. Question is, United, we would actually officially be out May 6th. And that's when the work will begin on Wesley Methodist Society.
We've done a lot of preliminary work.
Right. But I expect it's going to take several years as in terms of what's going to happen in the Methodist Church. I think there's going to be a lot of leaving and realigning, and things are going to happen. It will not be an overnight kind of thing. People will start going, we want to be here, we want to be there. Some of the churches who helped to form the Global Methodist Church, which is the most conservative church, where the founders have not gone and joined it yet. And they've been out 6 or 7 months and going, well, we're kind of thinking about it. Correct. You're
Every
required
church
to be.
has to leave independent.
That's what the disaffiliation agreement says, and then you can reaffiliate somewhere. Yes. One question. Yes.
On the question on recourse, and the answer was that we would talk to the bishop. Does that mean the bishop has the authority to override the vote of the
Bob?
You want to answer that one,
Bob?
Wendy? It's a great catch and a great question. And the answer is no.
Okay.
The bishop does not have the power to override. But there's no question that if we got into a discussion of what's the way forward, could we find a way that we all could agree on? And there probably would still have to be some legal proceedings to make it official, but it wouldn't have to be a fight. It would be, okay, we all agreed, let's go do this.
And he doesn't want that either.
And
He
so-
doesn't want to fight.
And we don't want to fight, they don't want. It's like, how do we find a way to do this? And the answer is we need to get a vote on April 22nd. If we get the vote on April 22nd, then it's all done, just very nice and easy. If not, there's still ways to go through and not have to have a bitter breakup. You know where I feel about that. Our goal is to take the high road no matter what. With everybody else, we're going to show sense of integrity and grace. All right, one last question. I lied earlier. You can show what kind of integrity I have. One last question. The answer is
In Oklahoma.
In the largest church in Oklahoma allowed to disaffiliate has been Asbury. And so they sailed through. They were right along with First Methodist in Tulsa and 29 churches, 28 other churches.
30 minutes.
30 minutes, easy vote, boom, was done. And so Asbury and us were we were just about neck and neck, same size. And so it would have been like, same issue. One of the differences is we're so much older and centrally located. And as I say, all the nostalgia of all the history. They've never hosted an annual conference. They've never had ordination services. It was a mega church. They let it go. And now we're looking at things of great nostalgia. I hope this has answered some of your questions. Thank you for hanging with us. Thank you for being with us online. Be praying about April 22nd and how God leads us into the future.
Next week, R. Cooper.
R.J. Hooper.